never expected my own son to look at me and see only a frail old woman. Yet there he was, lounging on my faded sofa, the corner of his mouth curled in that patronizing smirk I knew so well, and I felt it again, the familiar sting of invisibility. To him, I was nothing more than an aged relic, someone who should worry about knitting, tea, and the occasional doctor's visit. I played my part well. After all, appearances are powerful weapons, and I had long mastered the art of being underestimated. Every morning I would rise before dawn, the soft patter of my slippers against the cold hardwood a secret rhythm that reminded me of the world beyond my front door, my world, unseen and unassumed. In the kitchen, I brewed my tea with precision, measuring, steeping, swirling. My son would wander in, hair unkempt, bleary-eyed, as though the day owed him something. "Mom, do you have any cash?" "I forgot my wallet," he would ask, voice dripping with entitlement. I would hand him an envelope, modest in size, and watch his brow rise ever so slightly when he saw the neat stack of bills inside. I never let him linger on the surprise. The illusion must be maintained. I had learned long ago that humility in appearance often conceals strength. My fortune, amassed quietly through decades of shrewd investments, wise choices, and patient patience, was invisible to the naked eye. My home was modest, my clothes unremarkable, yet behind every ordinary object lay strategy, foresight, and control. Even my furniture, purchased for comfort rather than ostentation, spoke of subtle discipline, a choice that screamed efficiency over extravagance. It was a lesson in appearances I had learned the hard way, and I wielded it carefully now. Sometimes I would catch glimpses of his friends when they visited. They lounged with the arrogance of youth, tossing their jackets on my chairs, leaving coffee rings on my coasters, and laughing at jokes I barely followed. Their mockery was thinly veiled, their assumptions loud and clear. This woman, my son's mother, was poor, insignificant, and harmless. I smiled politely, nodding at their laughter, all the while noting the fine details, the pattern of their shoes, the glint of their watches, the careless slouch in their posture. Every detail mattered. Observation was my currency. I remembered a time long ago, when the world treated me with the respect it now denied. My career had demanded precision, judgment, and cunning. I had negotiated deals that left boardrooms silent, orchestrated strategies that shaped companies, and amassed wealth that would secure generations. Yet when I returned home, weary but accomplished, my own son saw only the woman with thinning hair, soft hands, and tired eyes. It was a cruel contrast. What the world once applauded now ignored. What my mind could achieve dwarfed by what my body appeared to offer. Every day, I navigated this strange duality. The quiet power of my mind hidden beneath the veil of age and modesty, and the daily slights of a son who assumed superiority. He would offer unsolicited advice on bills, on investments he barely understood, and on lifestyle choices, always with that condescending half-smile. "Mom, maybe you shouldn't buy that," he would say, eyeing a grocery bag full of fresh produce, as though my decisions were folly rather than careful consideration. I would nod, reply with measured politeness, and note the irony that the very items he questioned were meticulously chosen for both quality and cost-effectiveness. The emotional tension within me was constant. Hurt simmered beneath the surface, yet pride and patience kept me grounded. I knew the value of waiting, of letting time reveal truths in its own careful rhythm. I had seen the world move too quickly, rush to judgment, reward bluster over wisdom. My son's arrogance, while frustrating, was predictable. And predictability, in the hands of someone who observes and plans, is an advantage. I found solace in the small routines that others overlooked. Gardening became more than a hobby. It was a practice in precision and patience. Each seed planted, each branch trimmed, mirrored the strategies I had employed in my financial dealings. I tended to my roses as if negotiating contracts, assessing soil, sunlight, and water with care that belied the casual glance of a passerby. Even the way I arranged my books on the shelves reflected order, strategy, and a mind that never stopped calculating. To my son, it was just the eccentricity of an old woman. To me, it was a silent symphony of competence. One afternoon, as I sorted bills and receipts, he wandered in again, headphones dangling, phone in hand, oblivious to the world around him. "Mom, why do you even bother saving so much? You don't need it," he said casually, tossing a question into the air like a coin. I looked up, smiled faintly, and replied, "One day you might understand." He rolled his eyes and left, thinking nothing of my words. But inside, I was already plotting, not in malice, but in preparation. The moment of revelation, when he could no longer ignore the truth, was a prize worth the wait. The contrast between my outward calm and inner fire became a daily meditation. He could see the frailty, the soft voice, the slow movements. What he could not see were the calculations running in my mind, the careful orchestration of events that would, eventually, demand acknowledgement of my worth. Each interaction became a subtle game, a test of patience and cunning. I allowed him to underestimate me because in that underestimation lay my power. Memory often served as both shield and guide. I remembered late nights in the office, the thrill of deals that others thought impossible, the quiet satisfaction of seeing plans succeed while applause went elsewhere. My life had been a series of calculated risks, a careful balance of courage and discretion. Those experiences, while invisible to my son, shaped every decision I made now. I was not powerless. I was merely unseen. I also watched him with a critical eye. The habits, the entitlement, the assumptions. Each slip, each careless comment became fodder for my understanding. He mocked, yes, but he revealed himself in doing so. His friends laughed at what they thought were my quirks, but in reality, they revealed their own superficiality and judgment. I cataloged it all, mentally noting the differences between appearance and reality, between what was assumed and what was true. Even in moments of quiet solitude, I felt the tension of dual existence. Outwardly, I was polite, soft-spoken, unassuming. Inwardly, I was vigilant, strategic, alive to every detail and nuance. This was my world, one where weakness was a mask and strength a quiet, persistent force. Every interaction, every smile, every nod was a brushstroke in the larger canvas I was painting, a canvas my son had yet to recognize. I began to imagine the eventual confrontation, not confrontational in anger, but revelatory in impact. I pictured a day when his assumptions would crumble, when the illusion of my frailty would shatter under the weight of truth. It was not revenge I sought, it was recognition, a moment where respect was inevitable, where ignorance met undeniable insight. The suspense of that eventual reveal became a quiet, daily thrill, an anticipation that sharpened my mind and steadied my resolve. At the market, I noticed the cashier's glance linger a moment too long on my carefully calculated purchases. Did she suspect, I wondered, or did she too judge by appearances? I smiled inwardly. Everyone, it seemed, made assumptions, but assumptions were a tool, not a limitation. I had learned to use them, shape them, and wait for the perfect moment to bend them to my design. My son's mockery was merely one of many misjudgments, each an opportunity for eventual revelation. Even as I moved through my day, watering plants, preparing meals, arranging books, I remained acutely aware of the emotional contrasts around me. The laughter of my son's friends, the casual disrespect in his tone, the way the world often dismissed the elderly as weak, it all reinforced my purpose. I was not weak, not invisible, not powerless. I was waiting. I was watching. And every slight, every underestimation only fueled the suspense, the meticulous planning, the inevitable triumph that lay ahead. By nightfall, I sat in my armchair, the soft hum of the city outside my window, reflecting on the day's interactions. Each slight had been catalogued, each assumption noted, each detail logged in the meticulous ledger of my mind. My son believed he had all the power, yet the truth was quietly, irrevocably mine. The contrast between perception and reality was my ally, my secret, and my patience was my strategy. The illusion of weakness was complete. And so each day continued, a delicate dance of appearances and reality. I allowed the world and my son to see only what they wished, a frail, aging woman, polite, gentle, unassuming. But beneath that exterior burned the quiet intelligence, the careful planning, the strength and foresight that would one day emerge in full force. The suspense of that future, the anticipation of revelation, became my sustenance. Every insult, every mocking glance, every assumption, each one a brick in the path toward the day when the truth would shine unmistakably, and my son would finally see me for who I truly was. I knew that day was coming. And until then, I would continue my quiet vigil, perfecting the art of appearing weak, while cultivating the undeniable strength that lay just beneath the surface. The world might judge by appearances, but I had learned to judge by reality. And reality, in time, would reveal itself in the most unexpected, unforgettable way. I had been waiting for this day for years. though I never allowed my anticipation to show. My son, confident in his assumptions, never suspected that the very woman he mocked daily, his own mother, was quietly orchestrating a moment that would leave him speechless. I had invited him, along with a few of his friends, to what he thought was an ordinary dinner at my modest apartment. The truth was, every detail had been meticulously planned, every gesture, every timing, calculated for maximum impact. He believed he was walking into a familiar scene, yet what awaited him was nothing short of revelation. The table was set simply, deceptively so, plain linens, everyday china, and a modest bouquet of fresh flowers from my garden. I had arranged everything to lull them into comfort, to reinforce the image they had long believed, that I was the harmless, unremarkable mother who struggled with finances. I watched as they entered, their voices brash, full of youthful arrogance, unaware that their every assumption was about to crumble. "Mom, I didn't think you'd bother," my son said, glancing around the table with the casual disregard of someone who assumed superiority. His friends chuckled in agreement, nudging one another, clearly amused by the simplicity of my home. I smiled softly, nodding, pouring water into glasses with deliberate calm. "I thought it would be nice to have dinner together," I replied gently, letting the words hang in the air, unassuming, almost timid. I had instructed my banker to arrive mid-dinner. Not a flamboyant figure, but someone whose presence would immediately signal weight, professionalism, and gravitas. A quiet man, but one whose reputation spoke volumes in the financial world. As the conversation drifted toward casual chatter, my son bragging about his new car, his friends discussing investments they barely understood, I heard the faint sound of a knock at the door. "Come in," I called, voice steady. And in he walked, Mr. Whitman, my banker of decades, impeccably dressed, carrying the quiet authority of a man who knew power when he saw it. My son's casual grin faltered immediately. The friends exchanged puzzled glances. "Mrs. Harper," Mr. Whitman said, nodding politely. "Good evening." The warmth in his tone was professional but unmistakably respectful. My son's confusion grew as I gestured toward him. "This is Mr. Whitman. He handles my accounts," I said calmly, as though introducing a neighbor rather than a figure who represented the invisible empire I had built over a lifetime. The realization began to dawn slowly in their faces, a creeping awareness that the mother they assumed poor and frail was in fact the orchestrator of wealth, strategy, and intellect. What is he doing here?" my son stammered, the words betraying the shock he tried to suppress. "I invited him for dinner," I said lightly, pouring a glass of wine for myself. "I thought it might be interesting for you to meet someone who understands financial planning." There was a pause, a moment suspended in disbelief. His arrogance, once so natural, crumbled under the weight of newfound humility. I could see the subtle shifts in the room: disbelief, admiration, embarrassment, and a dawning comprehension. His friends, once so quick to mock, now studied me with tentative respect. Each glance, each gesture, was a reflection of the emotional contrast I had cultivated: ignorance versus wisdom, weakness versus strength. I allowed them to take it all in, letting the silence carry its own impact, knowing that revelation is most powerful when unhurried. I began to share stories of my past investments, phrasing them as casual anecdotes, though each detail subtly revealed the depth of my experience. "When I was your age," I said, looking at my son directly, "I negotiated a contract that saved my company millions. At the time, people underestimated me because I was a young woman. They assumed weakness, but the results spoke otherwise." I smiled faintly, seeing the recognition dawning in his eyes. He opened his mouth to reply, then closed it, as if he suddenly understood that the world and his own mother was far more complex than he had imagined. Mr. Whitman handed me a folder, one I had prepared in advance. It contained statements, investment summaries, and proof of accounts that would leave no doubt. My son leaned forward, hesitant, fingers hovering over the documents. "Mom, this can't be real," he whispered, the arrogance draining from his voice. I nodded, calm and deliberate. "It's real," I said softly, "and it's been managed carefully for years, exactly as you assumed I could not do." The room was thick with tension. Pride met humiliation, assumption met revelation. I watched as his friends exchanged nervous glances, realizing their mockery had been premature. The power of quiet patience, strategic discretion, and long-held wisdom was now undeniable. Every insult, every jest, Every eye roll my son had offered over the years dissolved into the stark reality of my accomplishment. I didn't know, my son said finally, voice low, almost reverent. It was not an apology, not yet, but it carried the seed of understanding. I smiled, not with triumph, but with quiet satisfaction. I had waited patiently, allowed their ignorance to persist, and now the truth could no longer be ignored. As dinner progressed, the conversation shifted naturally. Mr. Whitman answered questions I had not anticipated, subtly highlighting the extent of my planning and financial acumen. Each revelation reinforced the contrast between what had been assumed and what was true. My son listened, no longer the boy who laughed at me, but a man beginning to comprehend the reality of my life, the intelligence I had cultivated, and the patience I had exercised. I observed the transformation with careful attention. Embarrassment softened into reflection, disbelief shifted to admiration, and arrogance gave way to humility. The contrast was profound, and the emotional resonance immediate. I could see the understanding forming in my son's eyes, the recognition that his assumptions were not just incorrect, but shallow, premature, and unfair. And yet, I did not dwell on his shame. My purpose was not revenge, though the satisfaction of correction was undeniable. My aim was understanding, respect, and the subtle teaching that integrity, patience, and wisdom often triumph over superficial judgment. I allowed him to absorb the lesson in his own time, guiding gently but never forcing acknowledgement. After dinner, as the guests departed, I remained seated, reflecting on the evening's events. The moral tension, the emotional contrast, had reached its peak. I had maintained my outward calm, nurtured patience, and orchestrated a moment of undeniable revelation. My son's transformation, while not complete, had begun. He had glimpsed the truth of strength and intelligence hidden beneath a quiet exterior. In the quiet that followed, I considered my own journey. Life had taught me that appearances are deceiving, that patience can be a weapon, and that integrity often requires waiting for the right moment. My son had assumed weakness. He had met wisdom. He had assumed ignorance. He had encountered insight. The disparity between what was seen and what was real had been made tangible, undeniable, and deeply instructive. I realized then that true triumph is not in proving others wrong, but in guiding them to see the truth for themselves. My satisfaction was subtle, profound, and moral. I had wielded patience and intellect as tools of revelation, not vengeance. And in doing so, I reinforced the lesson I had long known. Strength is quiet, wisdom is patient, and true respect cannot be demanded. It must be revealed. As I prepared for bed that night, I thought of my son, still processing the evening's events. I knew that he would carry this experience with him, that his assumptions would be challenged, and that his perception of me, and perhaps of the world, would never be the same. I smiled softly, knowing that the seeds of understanding had been sown, and that my patience, discretion, and strategic foresight had achieved their ultimate reward. The contrast between what he had believed and what he now knew was stark. The boy who had mocked and belittled was now a man confronting the reality of his mother's strength and intelligence. And I, who had seemed frail and inconsequential, had quietly orchestrated a moral triumph that spoke louder than any words of reprimand. I closed my eyes, reflecting on the power of patience, the subtlety of strategy, and the quiet satisfaction of moral victory. Life had granted me the opportunity to reveal truth, to illuminate the depth of integrity, and to show that appearances are often misleading. I had proven that wisdom, strength, and foresight cannot be measured by age or outward fragility, but by the quiet impact of thoughtful action. And in that reflection, I felt complete. My son had learned, even if slowly, that the world is far more complex than it seems. The strength I had concealed for so long was no longer invisible, the wisdom no longer unacknowledged, and the moral triumph no longer postponed. For in revealing truth with grace, patience, and quiet authority, I had won not only respect, but affirmation of a lifetime of careful, considered, and deliberate living. The night closed around me, calm and resolute. I had orchestrated, revealed, and triumphed, not in anger, but in wisdom. My son, my friends, the world, they would remember this lesson, this moment when appearances failed and truth prevailed. And I, at last, could rest in the knowledge that strength, patience, and moral clarity had achieved their ultimate victory.